This week on the Powell Not Found podcast, we're talking about the MLB is racing to Bristol. The Olympics are coming to a close. Some Zelda news coming up from Nintendo, who released a new trailer, and an experience at Jiffy Lube live in Bristol, Virginia. Coming up next on the show. Let's go.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl who loves gin. A national pandemic seized her birthday celebration. Although she knew it was coming, we tried not to tell her. She brewed some Irish breakfast. Did she knew her birthday was getting corona?
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the show. This is the Powell Not Found podcast, and I forgot to fade down the music. There we go. Welcome to the show, everybody. This is the Powell Not Found podcast with your host, Mark Powell, at least this week. Go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts. We have a pretty kind of busy show. I didn't think it was going to be that way until I started kind of putting together the show notes for today, and I was like, you know what? We have a lot to talk about. Including some news from Major League Baseball. Now, it is the middle of the season, and it is what people would constantly refer to as the dog days of summer. You know, there's hurricanes coming up the East Coast, a lot of rain hitting North Carolina. Hopefully everyone's safe there. And we've got rainouts, we've got hot, humid days, and the season is either you're loving it, like the Baltimore Orioles just absolutely killing it on an everyday basis, or you're struggling through it like the Yankees going up and down, a roller coaster of a season, or you're the Chicago White Sox and you are just tired of the sport in general. You've done a full left turn into hey, I'm going to watch the Olympics so I can watch people who are actually talented at their team. I don't really understand why they decide to fire their manager this far gone into the season at this point. I mean, they are tanking. It is a terrible, terrible experience for Southside fans of baseball. But in the midst of all this stuff, as we kind of heat up into the last month and a half of the season, MLB says, hey, I've got an announcement. Now, I was not tuned into this, and I probably should have been, because the pattern of what they've been doing lately is right there in front of me. MLB says that it has an announcement to make. They're going to announce something big, and I'm assuming in my mind, I'm going, is somebody moving to a different league? Are we going to get an expansion? But no, Major League Baseball decides to announce that they have selected the next location of the I don't even call it an exhibition game. The next location of the strange places to play a baseball game series for next year. And next year it's going to be, drum roll, please. Do I have a drum roll on the soundboard? I feel like I should have a drum roll. No, I don't have a drum roll. That's so unfortunate. Anyways, it is going to be at Bristol Motor Speedway in Bristol, Tennessee. And if you're watching the video version of the podcast there, you can see a 3D rendering of what the field looks like. Pretty kind of cool. I mean, you know, for a place that holds 146,000 people. Yeah, you heard me right. 146,000 people. 5 times the amount of a normal average baseball field. If you think about, like, Fenway holds like what, 30,000? Yankee holds about 46 now, 47. Used to hold 54. This is triple old Yankee Stadium. And it will be pretty amazing to see that thing sold out and watch a baseball game. Now, if you're watching the YouTube version of the show, if you're sitting in some of these back rows, two things are going to happen. You're going to get a hell of an exercise going up and down these stairs for concessions here in the back rows here. I'm not sure what you're going to see deep center field at the at the very, very bottom of the ellipse that Bristol Motor Speedway has. You might not see players, but it would be an event to behold. Now, Bristol, weirdly enough, I've been to Bristol many, many times now, home of the Blackbird Bakery. And it kind of, the town itself kind of is in between Virginia and Tennessee. And the raceway is about 10 miles south of like what is the border town. This is an interesting place to see a game. I think this is a perfect way to actually drum up interest in the sport and kind of collide these two sports. Now, Bristol Motor Speedway is a NASCAR track. I got to assume there's a lot of overlap between NASCAR and Major League Baseball, right? I think it's fairly obvious why they picked this location in Bristol, because they want to see if Tennessee has a market for Major League Baseball, right? I think it's fairly obvious, right? I mean, for years, Major League Baseball has been talking about making the move to expand the amount of teams in the sport, right? We have 30 right now. Football has 32. I think hockey has 32 too. And right now, baseball, 30. We have not had an additional 2 teams really since 1998 in about 25 years when they added the Rays and the Diamondbacks, the Devil Rays, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, and the Arizona Diamondbacks. So it's been a while since a new team and a new market has entered Major League Baseball space. Of course, next year we're going to get the Sacramento A's, which are not called the Sacramento A's. They're called the A's, just the A's. No city is attached to this until they finally finalize or finish the closing of the Las Vegas deal. So we will have kind of a new franchise next year as they leave Oakland. But this is directly in line with, can we move a team to Nashville? I can't see how they would be able to dodge this about like, well, why'd you choose this location as opposed to any other track in the United States? Sure, it's iconic, but man, it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? With maybe we should move to Nashville. Maybe there's a market there. Maybe we can take some of those Braves fans that are sitting in Tennessee and turn them into a viable market. Maybe we can take the A's and move them to Nashville. Who knows? I just think this is a nice primer for what they plan to do eventually in Major League Baseball. Now, there's no immediate plans, for expansion right away. I think Manfred even said it's not even going to happen for another 5 years or something like that. And also, they have other franchises to fix before they add more franchises, right? Like, I mean, you've got Miami basically barely holding a crowd. The White Sox are tanking. There's barely a fan base when they're bad for the Rays for a long, long time, right? The A's, the A's need to be settled, right? They need to have a city. There's plenty of things to fix in Major League Baseball without bringing another team into the mix. But I thought this was just a fairly obvious play where, this isn't about history like the Field of Dreams game was in Kansas or the Rickwood Field was in June of this year when they celebrated the history of African American baseball in this country, right? Like this was directly kind of in line with like, okay, how can we make this sport bigger, but also kind of satisfy another kind of need? At least in my mind, I'm speculating here. The game itself will be the Reds and the Braves. Rickwood Field this year was the Giants and the Cardinals, and then the year before in the Field of Dreams game was the Yankees and the Chicago White Sox. So we are getting kind of a different 2 teams every single year. They did mention in this article from The Athletic that I was reading just before this, they did mention that there were some novelty games that have happened kind of in the past before this, and I just can't remember them that well. They said there was a game played at Fort Bragg at one point. There was the Red Sox and the Dodgers at the LA Coliseum that was probably the closest analogous to this thing. Also don't remember that one. But this one should be fun. I mean, if this thing sells out and they plan to have activities there outside the stadium, it should be like an F1 event where, you have 3 days. There's certainly other things going on besides the actual race. And it should bring a lot of tourism to Bristol. Like anybody going to this event, God, I want to go to this event. I want to see, I don't want to see how dear the ticket prices are going to be because they're going to be horrible. But I want to kind of see how, what this is going to be like. I'm sure it's going to be really, really fun to go to. I'm sure it's going to be really, really expensive to go to see that novelty of the game. But to see the game come to Bristol should be kind of interesting. I do think this kind of works better than their global initiative that they've been doing earlier this year. Now, this is not MLB specific, but the football has been doing the same thing when they've been taking a couple teams' home games and putting them in London or putting them in Germany or wherever in Europe somewhere, so they can expand the reach of the NFL and the MLB and all that kind of stuff. And earlier this year, I don't know if you guys have remembered or forgot. I certainly forgot. But before spring training ended, we had 2 major league games in the books between the Dodgers and the Giants that were in Korea. And the reason this event doesn't bother me as much as the global events do is because the global events are like impossible to go to. I mean, the Phillies and the Mets, right? I'm sure there are people here that took the trip across the country to go see a couple games from the Phillies and the Mets, and went to England and saw the game. I'm sure that happened, right? But you're still taking a home game away from New Yorkers, right? You're still taking a home game away from the Phillies, and in MLB, it doesn't feel like that much of a takeaway because you have 81 other games, right? Or excuse me, you have 78 other home games to go to if you're a fan. There's ample opportunity. So with the MLB, it doesn't really hurt as much, right? With football, I can't understand how fans aren't outraged when one of their home games gets taken away. I mean, that is a sizable chunk of the home season, right? You have 7 other opportunities, right? I can only imagine that there's one fan that's like, oh, we got 1 week off. Finally, we're going to go see the football game. It's in London. Oh, crap. I mean, it's, not everybody has the money to go see a sporting game abroad, but I like these ones, right? If you're going to take some home games away from the home fans, right? I like the fact that they're local and they're giving people, in the country an opportunity to see baseball that might not have an opportunity. So if you look geographically at where Bristol is, right? There is not many baseball parks around that area, right? You're either going 5 hours up to Cleveland, you're going 5 hours up to DC, 6 hours up to Baltimore, or probably 5 hours south to Atlanta, right? It's a big trip, regardless of where you go, to find Major League Baseball. And so in this particular case, I really like this choice because you're taking a geographic region that doesn't exactly have access to see this and saying, hey, we're taking out one of the biggest theaters that we can here for everyone to see this one game in the area. And I'm sure it's going to be full of people that are famous and all that kind of stuff, and full of people that have larger means than I do in order to see this game. But it should be, at least it gives some people the opportunity in Bristol to say, hey, this is an event. You go to NASCAR here all the time. Now it's Major League Baseball. We're going to switch. I think that's a perfect thing to do here. Sorry for all the audio issues here. I think there's either my XLR cable is dying or the mic is dying. So let's hope it's the XLR cable. Also, too, MLB would argue the same thing about what I was saying about taking these games and putting it to London. We're giving people the opportunity across the world now to see our sport, right? And that's a totally fair argument. It's just one of those things where it was hard as a viewer of the game. And I know this has been going on all week with the Olympics, which we'll talk about later on in the show. It's hard to watch those games, right? Because they are the ones in Korea this earlier this year were on at like 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, you've missed the games, right? Now the key demographic that is going to watch those games have missed it, right? You gave exposure to people who wouldn't normally see it, and that's great. But also, you should probably play the games in some sort of way that both demographics can tune in, right? So you have that thing. It's never going to be a perfect solution to expand the game, but I do think that this particular one, I think, is a smart move. It also kind of satisfies their need to see if there is actually a viable market in Nashville, because they've been flirting with that, or flirting with Tennessee for quite some time. I know Bristol is not Nashville, but man, it's pretty close, right? It's pretty close in terms of what they want to accomplish to kind of figure that stuff out going through. So that's going to be July, end of July of next year, 146,000 person capacity. And it's going to follow in the wake of the Rickwood Field game and the Field of Dreams game, which happened the last couple of years, respectively. So Bristol Motor Speedway coming to Major League Baseball, kind of really exciting. So hopefully there's more to come, and there's better environments to do these kind of things in. Very surprised, just to kind of cap this off, and then we'll take a quick break and we'll come back to the Olympics. Just some thoughts on the Olympics before they close. One, very surprised that they didn't choose F1 as a venue for this. And the reason being is because F1's having like a moment, and NASCAR will probably come at me and say, no, NASCAR's been having a moment for a long time, but they built that big theater. They built that big stadium and big raceway in Las Vegas for F1 to be there for the next 9 years, right? Why they didn't use that, and maybe because just the raceway is not conducive enough to actually fit a Major League Baseball park in the middle of it, maybe they didn't want to disturb the newness of the field. That could be it. But you think that would go hand in hand, and maybe that's an opportunity for next year. It just feels like F1's a little bit more in the zeitgeist than NASCAR is, but again, it doesn't. They know they're coming to Las Vegas. They don't really know yet if they're coming to Nashville. So maybe that's the reason they didn't pick it. But hopefully that would be another opportunity to kind of like see if something works there, or bring the sport to a different city in a different geographic location. Surely, some of the Major League Baseball fans out west need a different team to look at. There is a lot in California, and not a lot once you are sitting in the middle of Colorado. You got the Rockies, and then there's pretty much a dearth of Major League Baseball teams represented out there. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some thoughts that I had about watching the Olympics. We'll talk a little bit of Zelda and a little bit of Jiffy Lube Live coming up next on the Powell Not Found podcast. So stick around with us, all right? Hey, everybody, and welcome back from the break. This is, again, the Powell Not Found podcast with your host, Mark Powell. I had quite a good week this week. I went to go see a concert, Dan and Shay, or as I like to call them, Dan plus Shay, which I fully intended and thought was a country group, and ended up being more kind of like traditional pop at Jiffy Lube Live, which is a venue in Bristol, Virginia, right near Manassas, Virginia. And that was the first time I'd actually been there. and comparing it to like Wolf Trap, which is another kind of similar outdoor kind of venue that has a stage and a lawn and kind of traditional seats and stuff like that. And I gotta say, Jiffy Lube Live, one of way better if you're like sitting on the lawn, right, and in the cheap seats, right, in the $15, $10 seats or whatever, way better an experience than Wolf Trap. I still like seeing shows at Wolf Trap. I've seen many shows at Wolf Trap now, but the experience at Jiffy Lube Live, just because the rake of the lawn end of the stage, you can see everything, which is something you can't see at Wolf Trap, right? If you're at a certain point of the lawn, you're looking at screens, you're not even seeing the person on stage. It just feels like you're watching a video screen if you're in Central Park somewhere, and it's like, someone's playing in the distance, but you can't see them. That was not the case at Jiffy Lube, which I really kind of appreciated whoever built that amphitheater, that they kind of made that consideration, that it's like, listen, if you didn't want to spend the money, if you buy $10 seats, you can still see the artist and still feel like you're a part of a concert venue. A lot of walking. It's not conducive if you're not like game for a lot of steps and a lot of walking and stuff like that. It's quite the journey from the parking lot to the actual stadium there. So be forewarned. But I did see a nice show there. Also saw a kind of what is his name? There was a guy that was introduced in the middle of the concert, and I'm no country expert, as everyone can tell, right? My people like to joke that that my musical knowledge basically dies at like 1972. So not a lot of knowledge past then of current artists, but Drew Baldridge was introduced in the middle of this concert. He has a kind of a hit song on TikTok called She's Somebody's Daughter. And he described like the release of this song kind of in a peculiar way that I didn't realize. And if you listen to the song, it's a very, very country song. I mean, it's about as country as a saloon in the West, right? It's like it's pretty country, right? But he described the song as like, he released it on TikTok and then got like millions of views and then got no calls from record companies wanting to sign him after all that kind of stuff. So I guess he made his own label and then released the song itself. The song is okay, and it kind of grows on you and stuff like that. It's a little bit of kind of a interesting country song. I think it kind of falls into traditional country pretty easily. If you told me this came out in 1996 and 1986, I'd be like, fine, yeah, sure, it probably did. Sounds kind of like similar, but I don't have really the ear that's trained for country music the way I do for like old kind of like rock and roll and all that kind of stuff. But it's a sweet song. It's just kind of interesting that he had to make his own label to actually kind of get notoriety. It makes you think like, what do you have to do to get a traditional label to actually look at you at some point? And as a person who used to, really try to like get his stuff noticed, from a musical perspective, it kind of intrigued me a little bit because his route to getting now introduced with a pretty popular artist, Dan and Shay. Ooh, there's a weird audio kind of glitch. It was very much of the. It was very enlightening to hear him kind of say, "Hey, I just kind of did it myself, and I, screw all the labels. I'll make my own label and punch my own music up." And it very much falls in line with that kind of like democratization of the music industry when SoundCloud came out, when Bandcamp came out, when all these places, you didn't need any additional label to kind of help market you. You could just market yourself to the masses, and how the internet kind of changed and completely leveled the music industry as a whole. Like, you didn't need anybody's permission anymore to be an artist. You could just put it out, and hopefully with enough traction, you'd make enough noise that people could look after you. In his case, he did make enough noise and still no one looked at him, which was kind of very surprising. But go check out his song. It was interesting. He was very, very good live. And it was really interesting to see all of Jiffy Lube live singing to the song. And I was like, didn't even know it existed before I went to the show. So really cool theater to kind of go see this week, and did that along with, now I'm watching the end of the Olympics. And I figured, since the Olympics next week will be gone, and it's not going to be around for 4 more years. Next 4 years, it will be in Los Angeles. Closing ceremonies are tomorrow. I figured I'd give you my closing thoughts on what I am taking away from the Olympics. Now, just to give you a perfect idea of how much of an Olympic expert I am. Ooh, man, this mic is dying. I never followed the Olympics as much as I did this year. This was the year that I said, you know what? I'm ready for it. I didn't miss it. I don't have cable, but I've got NBC over the HD antenna channels. I can do it. Right? I'm going to follow this Olympics pretty closely. And one of the things that I took away from it was, one, it's amazing how quickly you can turn from knowing nothing about the sport to judging people like an expert on the couch, right? Watching diving in particular, I went from knowing absolutely nothing about diving and to about 5 minutes realizing, going, man, that's not a good dive. Didn't execute hard enough. Like, acting like I was the expert in about 2 seconds. That's my Olympic experience. Watching people run down the track, I'm like, got to give it your all, son. Like, I cannot run more than a 25-minute mile, and I'm judging this guy, right? These people are great, great athletes, right? So the psychology that's happening to me on the couch is astounding, right? I also think that there is, let me turn down this gauge quite a bit here. I also think there's a little bit of weird coverage by NBC, because every single time I turn on the television, and maybe I'm just missing it, a lot of people have told me that they're also covering other sports on different channels. So if you don't have cable, you're kind of out of luck a little bit, because it's not just NBC that's covering it, but other additional subsidiary channels are having some of the other sports. But they'll recap some of the most interesting sports, and keep showing on primetime the most traditional type of sports. Now, I'm sure that NBC has hired some college and told a bunch of interns to go crunch the numbers, come back to us. What's the most viewable show or sport that we need to show the public so that we can get the highest ratings? I'm sure the science has been baked, right, into what they're actually surfacing. So that's why we're always seeing running, track, and swimming, diving, volleyball, right? These things that they know they're going to get viewership from, right? But something about the Olympics just begs, like, well, there are interesting sports, right, that you're not necessarily going to see highlighted unless you're on ESPN 17, right? How many times in our lives do we really get to see the discus? How many times in our life do we really actually sit down to diligently watch shot put? 0. Once every 4 years during the Olympics. It's amazing to me that they're not pushing these sports forward. And I can understand it. It's all about ratings. I get that part. But like, as a person who wants variety from the Olympics, because that's what the Olympics is about, it's funny to me that I keep running into the same things. This year, France gets to add its own sport, right? Part of the sports that they added were breakdancing, right? You got to put breakdancing front and center, right? Everyone in this country wants to know what a gold medal breakdancer is. I want to know what a gold medal breakdancer is. So the next time I see it in the street, I can say, you know what? That was good, but that's a bronze effort. You got to put this stuff front and center. I'm just kind of surprised at how homogenous the whole thing seemed and how the same everything was. That said, I know a lot more about the Olympics and about these sports than I ever did before. I think the funny thing about the Olympics is that it gives people fame and notoriety in a way that's so white hot, like intense, and then will immediately go away in a puff of smoke in 2 days. Now, I'm not saying that the notoriety for Simone Biles will go away. I think she might transcend that the way that Michael Phelps did, right? I think Katie Ledecky, might have the same thing. But some of these guys, I think they just, because they're on TV, because they're representing America, they'll get their moment, and then it will kind of go away eventually. The girl from Arlington, Tori Husk, I can't remember anymore what her last name is. That's how funny and fast it goes away. And there was a guy even after Michael Phelps. I can't remember his name anymore, but he was like touted as like the next guy who was going to take over the reins once Michael Phelps was over. I have no idea. I couldn't pick him out from a lineup. Right? That's how quick some of these things are, which makes me kind of think that the Olympics should be longer, right? And maybe 2 weeks is the perfect time to get everything in. I'm not sure why they make it just 2 weeks. Was it historically just 2 weeks? In Greece, was it 2 weeks long? I don't know what the answer is there, but I feel like if once every 4 years for 2 weeks is just entirely too short. And maybe after a month, people are like, I don't even give a crap if we win gold, right? Maybe the intensity of things happening all the time give it a little bit more energy, which could be the case. But I think that it should be a little bit longer. I think 2 weeks is a little bit too compressed of a time. Maybe people can't take that much time off of work to just focus on the sport. And maybe that's why they keep it to 2 weeks, because they're like, well, that'll probably work with everyone. I also think the last thing I want to say about the Olympics is that, one, it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to be a part of that conversation this year, or this time around. I'm excited to see what LA does with it. I got to hope that LA is representing when they do their opening ceremonies, and I guess they have a little bit of the closing ceremonies, that Tom Cruise is going to skydive into he's going to skydive into Paris as the representative from LA. So already, like, are the Olympics going to be held in America, or are they going to be held in Hollywood? You know what I mean? Like, is it going to be actually indicative of all of America? There was the one story that was on the internet of some person, touring people around LA, and they saying, okay, this is your country, show us around. And he was from Hershey, Pennsylvania. I mean, it's America's huge, right? So is it really just about Los Angeles in the next 4 years? Is it going to be just about Los Angeles? Is it going to be film centric, right? Star centric? Or are we going to have more of an American theme that represents all of us in the next 4 years? That will be the curious question on my mind 4 years from now. Hopefully we'll cover it on the podcast 4 years from now on episode 200, right? Subscribe to make that happen. And the last point I want to make here is that there should be a comparison, right? And I think this would make the Olympics better, because we are seeing the top of the top, the cream of the crop, right? We should be able to see what a comparison person looks like swimming. We should be able to see what a comparison person looks like running, right? Pick somebody from the crowd and have them run on the outside lane, just so we know how good these people are, right? Because when it's like when you need something for scale in front of something to show how big it is. Like, this boat is huge. Well, how do you know? Look, there's a little guy in front of him. That's showing you what 6 feet is, right? We need that comparison to just realize how talented these people are. Because when they're all running against the similar-ish talent, it is hard to tell. Like, I'd like to see someone make their first dive from 30 meters and compare it to the people who are doing a 30-meter dive while doing 6 flips in the air, right? It's not that I'm saying that I want the competition to start with a belly flop, but I want a belly flop in the middle just to give my mind a reminder of how good these people are. Anyways, when we come back, we'll close with a little bit of the Zelda trailer that just dropped from Nintendo on Echoes of Wisdom, and we'll take a quick break here, and we'll close out the show soon, okay? We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. Again, this is the Powell Not Found podcast, episode 31. We are going to close out the show today by talking a little bit about a new trailer that Nintendo just dropped. And I got to admit, I don't talk about video games that often as I'd like to talk about them on the show, because there's honestly not that much time, right? But the reason I'm bringing this up is just because of the absolute beauty of this game and trailer and stuff like that. This is Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which comes out like end of September, which is a game that we've covered before on the podcast, which is a Legend of Zelda game that with a playable Zelda. Now, the reason I bring this up is because not only is it kind of beautiful, they introduced new mechanics in the game, but it was kind of a segue for me to talk a little bit about 3D art and how beautiful this stuff is. Now, they're clearly taking a Tears of the Kingdom approach to this game, where you can kind of do anything, be creative, combine everything, which was kind of breaking the conventions of Zelda in the first place. But this kind of goes in line with all, basically for the last month, I've been kind of trying to teach myself 3D art. And the more and more I look at things like this, the more and more I start realizing how incredibly detailed and amazing some of this art is, like the water and the way that it kind of the caustics reflect in the water. These kind of materials are all very, very different that are kind of layered and textured on these things. It's really, really fascinating to me that the team over in Nintendo can really take this, that much care and really make these things look almost like you're playing in a gigantic figurine set. The art style in this game has been kind of compared to when they came out with the remake of Link's Awakening. They came out with it was compared a lot to the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the Island of Makeshift Toys, or whatever, the Island of Misfit Toys from that scene. And that's what it kind of looks like. It kind of emulates. And this trailer in particular is very, very, very much in that style. Right. And this game is very, very much in that style. At first, I did not like it. I have learned to kind of love this new style of 3D, this new style of visuals, from everything from the way that everything feels and interacts, and even like the kind of shallow depth of field camera, isometric kind of camera that they have on everything really, really makes this thing shine. And still gives you the same feeling that you got when you were looking at like an old Super Nintendo game, like Link to the Past, right? It still emulates that vibe really, really well. I kind of wanted them to come back to that kind of pixel-esque graphic style in the future and get away a little bit from this the shiny CGI kind of plastic model look. But they're both really, really amazingly artistically directed, but Man, I've really learned to kind of love this style. So new mechanics coming to this game. It looks more interesting by the moment, and I really hope this game sells because it's as a creative, it is again that kind of challenge all the time of like, how do you reinvent yourself? And they're clearly doing this with the Legend of Zelda series, where now it's like, what do you do, and what do you get once you top yourself? How do you top yourself again? And I think it's a really creative way that they've been doing it, with not only changing who you're playing, but changing the entire mechanic of the game, which is very, very impressive in its own right. So I just wanted to give that a quick shout out at the end of the show, because I'm really excited for this game, and I'll probably review it on the actual show once it comes out at the end of September. But with that said, we're going to close out the show here and give you guys a chance to enjoy your weekend. Thank you guys for tuning into the show. Again, this was a shorter one. We'll be back next week with we'll be back next week with more movies and a better mic, because this mic is clearly dying. With that said, I'm Mark Powell for the Powell Not Found podcast. Checking out for the weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Corona.